The great hall of the academy was wide and bright, its walls lined with banners of many alien species. Cadets from across the galaxy sat in long rows, each one tense as the instructor walked to the front, his heavy boots echoing across the polished floor. The air was heavy with silence and expectation, for this was the day of the tactical challenge, a test that had broken many minds before. The instructor was tall and scaled, his eyes glowing faintly as he looked over the cadets. He had fought wars long before most of them were born. He had watched empires rise and fall, and now he trained the young who dreamed of command. Yet he did not teach with kindness. He taught with fire and pressure, and he enjoyed watching pride collapse under impossible weight. He enjoyed seeing who would endure and who would break. He raised his hand, and the room grew colder. The lights dimmed, and a wide screen appeared behind him, showing a map of broken star systems, empty voids, and scattered fleets. His voice was low yet sharp, every word cut into the air like a blade. He said this was the test, the same test that no one had solved in years, a puzzle built from chaos, a scenario where defeat was certain and only imagination could turn it into victory. The alien cadets leaned forward, their faces tight with fear. Whispers spread among them. They knew the tales. They knew the instructor's puzzle was meant to destroy confidence. It was not made for learning. It was made for humiliation. Those who tried often left in shame. Those who failed were remembered for their failure. In the third row, a human cadet sat still, his uniform neat, his eyes calm. Most did not even notice him, for humans were considered simple, a new species at the academy, untested and primitive. To the others, he was little more than background, but in his silence there was something strange, something steady, as if the storm above him could not reach his mind. The instructor spoke again, his voice rising. He explained the fleets in detail. He described supply routes cut by raiders. He pointed at hidden enemies waiting in ambush. He described broken communication lines and shattered morale. Each detail added another layer of confusion, until the map looked like a spider web ready to trap any thought. The cadets frowned and clutched their heads, the puzzle already twisted inside them. The instructor ended with a slow grin, his scaled teeth glinting under the light. He said whoever could solve this puzzle would command the stars one day. He said no cadet had ever done it, and he laughed quietly as if daring them to even try. His eyes moved across the hall, searching for a victim, waiting for the first to collapse under pressure. For a long moment no one moved. The silence was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the machines. Then from the third row the human cadet lifted his hand, calm and steady, as if the weight of the hall was nothing to him. Every alien head turned in shock. Gasps spread quickly. The human was volunteering. The primitive dared to face the storm. The instructor froze for a breath. Then his grin returned, sharp and cruel. He asked if the human even understood the challenge. He asked if he knew what he was risking. But the human's voice was clear, simple. He said he was ready. Nothing more, nothing less. Those words cut deeper than a speech, for they carried no fear. Laughter broke out among the cadets. Some laughed in scorn, others in disbelief. To them this was madness. No one believed a human mind could endure the puzzle. Yet beneath the laughter there was unease, a strange current that spread through the hall. For the human's eyes did not shake, his body did not tremble. He looked at the storm as if it was nothing but rain. The instructor raised his hand, and the laughter died quickly. He enjoyed the show. He wanted to see this human crumble, to prove the weakness of his kind. He ordered the human to step forward. The cadet rose from his seat and walked down the steps, his boots light, his steps steady, each echo loud in the silence, as if he carried no weight at all. When he stood before the great screen, the instructor leaned close, his voice low and sharp. He said this puzzle would break him. He said even the brightest alien cadets had fallen. He said this was not meant for a child of Earth. But the human simply nodded, his hand already reaching for the console, ready to begin. The hall held its breath, alien eyes wide with disbelief. Some whispered that this was foolish. Some whispered that it was brave. But none could look away. They all knew something strange was about to happen, something they did not understand. For in that moment the human was no longer invisible. He was the center of the storm, and the storm had just begun. The screen brightened until the whole hall glowed with cold starlight. A wide map stretched across the wall, showing broken systems scattered like shards of glass, fleets marked with shifting symbols, red for enemies, blue for allies, green for supplies, and the lines between them tangled in confusion. The instructor spread his long-scaled arms and declared that this was not just a puzzle, but a battlefield written in pain. He said this was a true reflection of war, where nothing was simple and everything collapsed unless the commander could see patterns hidden in the storm. The cadets leaned forward, their minds already shaking. The enemy was everywhere, fleets split across asteroid belts, colonies burning under siege, allies cut off with no fuel, supply routes crawling with raiders, communication nodes shattered, and every solution that rose in a mind was broken by another problem. It was like water running through fingers. Nothing could be held, and the instructor smiled as he saw the fear in their faces. He thrived on fear. He wanted them to feel that war was hopeless unless they could think beyond themselves. He described the enemy commander, a ghost figure hidden in the shadows, unpredictable and ruthless. He reminded the cadets that this enemy had centuries of experience. He asked them if any of them had the courage to step forward. No one answered, only shifting eyes and tight jaws, because they all knew that stepping forward meant humiliation, and humiliation stayed with the cadet longer than wounds. The human stood still, his hand already on the console, his face calm, his breath slow, while alien eyes stared with disbelief. The instructor sneered and gave him permission to act, expecting chaos, expecting the boy to drown in the storm. But the human nodded, and the screen shifted, maps turning, icons glowing, pathways opening under his touch. At first it looked random. His hands moved too fast, tracing lines across the stars, shifting fleets into strange formations, cutting supply routes here, redirecting there. The cadets frowned. Some laughed, whispering that the human was just scribbling nonsense. They thought he was lost already. But the instructor leaned closer, his scaled brow tightening, because beneath the chaos there was something alive. The human whispered to himself as he worked, not words of theory, not long equations, only simple thoughts. He said the left flank folds here. He said supplies jump through this belt. He said allies regroup in this pocket. And he said the enemy believes they are hunting, but they are already being herded. His voice was quiet yet sharp, his words plain yet heavy. They carried no decoration, only truth. And the cadets felt their stomachs twist, for they could not even follow the puzzle, and yet this human spoke as if it was nothing more than a game. The map began to change. The red icons that once dominated the stars started shrinking, cut apart not by force, but by clever paths. The enemy lines stretched too thin, their ambushes revealed, their fleets out of position. The human had not just solved one piece. He was solving all of them at once, moving like a painter across a canvas, strokes bold and flowing, and the chaos became order. The hall grew silent except for the hum of the machines. Cadets who had laughed now leaned forward, their eyes wide, their disbelief melting into awe and fear. One whispered that no alien had ever done this. Another whispered that humans were supposed to be primitive. Another whispered that this was not possible. And the whispers turned into silence again, because they all knew they were watching something that should not exist. The instructor narrowed his eyes, searching for flaws. He threw questions at the human. He said, what if the enemy strikes here? What if the allies falter? What if the supply lines break again? Each question was a knife. But the human answered without hesitation, his fingers moving as he spoke. He shifted fleets. He folded lines. He turned each knife into a shield. He did not hesitate, not once. And the instructor felt a rare thing rising in his chest. A thing he hated. A shadow called doubt. The plan grew clearer. The human created a trap so wide that the enemy would never see it until it closed around them. Every red fleet was pushed slowly toward a single-star system, a system that seemed safe, but was a cage. The cadets gasped as they saw it unfold. The enemy would enter with confidence, and then the trap would snap shut. Allies would strike from hidden paths. Supplies would flow through secret channels, and the war would end in a single decisive moment. The instructor stepped back, his scales rippling with unease. He had created this puzzle to break minds, but now the puzzle was being broken instead, not with brute strength, not with endless calculation, but with imagination. The human had taken the tangled mess and made it breathe, as if the battlefield itself had become a living thing under his control. The cadets felt something heavy inside them. Some felt anger that a primitive mind had done what they could not. Some felt shame that all their years of study meant nothing before this strange vision, but others felt wonder. They saw not just a human, but a new way of thinking, a way that could change how wars were fought. They felt the shape of destiny moving quietly through the hall. The human finished with a single sweep of his hand. The screen glowed with the final formation. Every fleet in place, every route secured, the enemy surrounded, the battle already decided before it began. He looked at the map with calm eyes and said nothing more, as if to him it was finished, simple, obvious, while the others could hardly breathe. The hall was silent, the silence of disbelief, the silence of fear, the silence of something new entering their world, and in that silence the instructor stared at the human, his voice low and uneven. He admitted that the plan worked. He admitted what no instructor had ever admitted, that the puzzle had been solved. The cadets could not move. Their minds spun, their pride shattered, yet their eyes remained locked on the human, because they knew they had witnessed something greater than a lesson. They had witnessed the rise of a power they did not understand, and in that moment the human was no longer a cadet. He was a shadow stretching over the stars. The instructor forced himself to smile, but inside his heart was burning. He wondered if this was only the beginning. He wondered if one human could do this alone. What would happen if many humans learned? He wondered if the galaxy was ready, or if it would be broken, and his unease grew like fire in the dark. The human stepped back, his hands calm at his sides, his face steady, and he returned to his seat without a word. But the hall could not return to normal. The storm had already passed, and it had left the academy changed forever, for the maze of war had been broken by a mind that should never have been able to break it, and nothing would ever be the same again. The hall still carried silence heavy as stone. The map glowed faint across the wide wall. The human sat again in his place, but eyes across the chamber refused to leave him. Cadets of every species whispered to themselves, some in awe, some in disbelief, and others in anger, for they had trained since childhood, and yet none of them had even begun to solve the puzzle. And this human who was supposed to be simple had walked through it as if it were a child's game. The instructor cleared his throat with a rough growl, his scales shifting as he spoke. He told the cadets to watch carefully. He told them to study the human's choices, yet his voice shook with tension, for deep inside he felt unease. He felt as if something was slipping out of his control. He felt as if the puzzle he had used for years to humble the young had turned against him, and the cadets could hear the weight in his words. One cadet of the Seric species raised a claw, his voice sharp and bitter. He demanded to know how the human could think in such a way. He said no mind could calculate so quickly. He said it was trickery. Another cadet of the Varen joined, his long throat quivering with rage. He declared that the human must have been prepared, that the test had been whispered to him in secret. Others nodded, their pride burning too hot to accept what they had seen. The human looked at them with calm eyes. He did not rise. He did not argue. He only spoke in simple tone. He said there was no secret. He said he had never seen the puzzle before. He said he did not calculate. He only saw. His words puzzled them even more, for to their minds seeing was not enough. To their minds every battle was numbers upon numbers, and without endless training no solution could exist. The instructor leaned forward, his scaled hand pressing against the console. He asked the human to explain. He demanded to know what he meant, for explanation was part of the Academy's creed. The human nodded and stood slowly. He turned toward the map still glowing on the wall. He began to speak with plain words, not complex theory, not lofty terms, only simple lines. He said war was not numbers. War was people. Fleets were not icons. They were hearts beating in ships. Supply lines were not lines. They were fear or hope depending on how they moved. Ambushes were not traps. They were only shadows, and shadows fade when light is shown. He told them he did not see the puzzle. He saw choices, and he chose faster than the enemy, and once chosen the enemy had already lost. Cadets frowned, their heads tilted. They tried to make sense of his words. Some shook their heads, calling it madness. Some narrowed their eyes, whispering that it was genius. The hall filled with a storm of voices, yet beneath it all the map seemed to glow brighter, as if the stars themselves understood what he meant. The instructor tried again. He asked if the human had studied military theory on Earth. He asked if his people had ancient books of strategy. The human shook his head slowly. He said his people did not survive by reading books in times of battle. He said his people survived by acting when fire was already burning, by moving when danger was already upon them, by finding paths when none seemed open. He said survival taught more than any school. This answer struck the cadets hard, for most of them had grown inside Great Academy since youth. They had memorized codes and formulas. They had been taught that victory was a science written in numbers. Yet here was a human saying that victory was not memorized. Victory was lived. Victory was born in fire. And his words dug into their thoughts like knives. One young cadet of the Chirene whispered aloud that maybe this was why the puzzle had fallen. Maybe the human mind was not chained to rules. Maybe it saw without walls. Others hushed him, fearful of agreeing. But the idea spread like smoke in the hall. The idea that perhaps humans thought in a way no other species did. The idea that perhaps this was not a trick, but a truth. The instructor felt the eyes of the cadets turning. He felt control slipping further. He tried to remind them that one puzzle did not prove power. He tried to remind them that war was vast. But even as he spoke, his voice lacked the strength it once carried. Because in his heart he knew what he had witnessed was not chance. He had seen speed. He had seen clarity. And it unsettled him deeply. The human returned to his seat. He folded his hands on the desk, his face calm, his body still. He seemed untouched by the storm of voices, and this calmness only deepened the strange weight in the hall, for even those who hated him could not deny that something different lived inside his mind, something they could not measure or predict. The Sarek cadet slammed his claw against the desk. Sparks flew. He shouted that the academy should not allow a human to stay. He said this was corruption, but his words carried less force now. For others had begun to see not weakness, but potential, and though they feared it, they could not erase it from their sight. The image of the puzzle broken so easily lingered in their minds like fire that refused to die. The instructor ended the session at last. His voice low and sharp, he dismissed the cadets. He told them to return to their quarters. Yet none left quickly. Groups lingered in corners, whispering, glancing at the human, some whispering of danger, others of hope. And the human rose quietly and walked toward the exit, his steps light, his shadow long under the glow of the lamps. As he left the hall, many eyes followed, and for the first time in the history of the academy a human was no longer invisible. He was no longer dismissed as primitive. He was something else, something unknown, and unknown things stir fear, but they also stir respect. The instructor remained standing at the front, his claws tapping the desk, his scales shifting in unease. He told himself again that one puzzle was nothing. He told himself the cadets would forget, but his own mind betrayed him, for he could not forget the speed. He could not forget the vision. He could not forget the simple words. I did not calculate, I only saw. And he knew deep inside that this mind was different. He left the hall alone, his heavy steps echoing through the stone corridors. He thought of wars he had fought, of commanders he had faced, of strategies he had broken. None of them had unsettled him like this. None of them had made him feel as if the galaxy was shifting under his feet, and he wondered if the future had just taken a new shape without his permission. Meanwhile, the human walked slowly through the academy corridors, cadets parting before him, some glaring, some whispering, some lowering their eyes. He did not smile. He did not boast. He only walked as if this moment was natural, as if solving impossible puzzles was not triumph but routine, and this calmness unsettled them more than arrogance ever could. In the quiet of his dormitory he sat by the window, the stars shining beyond the glass. He whispered to himself that they still did not understand. He whispered that war was not numbers, it was choice, and as long as he could see choice, no puzzle could cage him. His eyes reflected the stars, and in that reflection there was something both gentle and dangerous, the sign of a different mind. The academy hall was alive with whispers that would not fade. The map still glowed faint across the wall, though the puzzle was finished, and yet no one could step away. The cadets remained in their seats, as if bound by unseen chains. The instructor stood silent at the front, his scaled hands tight on the desk, his eyes locked on the human, who had returned to his seat with calmness, as if nothing had happened. And in that moment the hall no longer felt like a place of training. It felt like the center of a storm. The silence cracked when one cadet shouted that it was impossible. Another argued that it had been proven before their eyes. A third shouted that it must be a trick. but their voices tangled and collapsed into confusion. The hall sounded more like a market than a military chamber. And still the human sat steady, his face calm, his eyes quiet, and his presence was a stone in the river of their noise, making the water split around him. The instructor raised his clawed hand for silence, his voice heavy and sharp. He told them that debate could not erase what had been shown. The puzzle was designed to crush minds, yet it had been solved in moments, and even he could not deny the truth of the result. His words struck the cadets harder than thunder, for never before had the instructor admitted failure in his test. Never before had he said that his puzzle could be broken. Gasps moved through the chamber. Cadets turned toward the human with new eyes, some burning with jealousy, some heavy with respect, some clouded with fear, because what they had just seen was not only intelligence, it was speed, it was vision, it was something they could not copy with all their years of training. It was a path they could not walk because their minds were chained to rules, and the human's mind moved beyond rules, as if rules were smoke in the air. The instructor turned to the human and demanded he explain once more. He asked how the plan could stand against pressure. He said every victory falls when pressed. The human rose quietly. He walked toward the screen again, his hand brushing the console, the stars glowing bright under his touch, and he spoke in that same plain voice. He said, "Test it if you wish." He said, "Move the enemy here." He said, "Break the supply lines again." And with each move the instructor made to shatter the plan, the human shifted a single piece, and balance returned. The cadets leaned closer, their hearts racing. They saw with their own eyes that every challenge folded into the plan. Every flaw was already answered. Every weakness was turned into strength. And the instructor's face grew tight, his jaw clenched, his scaled brow heavy, because no matter how he twisted the puzzle, the human untwisted it faster, until there was no doubt left in the room. The plan was not only bold, it was flawless. The moment stretched long, the hall frozen in a silence that felt alive, and then it cracked when the instructor admitted with rough voice that the plan worked. He did not want to say it, yet the truth had forced itself from his lips. The cadets gasped again, some looking at the human with awe, others lowering their heads with shame, but none could erase the memory of what they had seen. The impossible had been made simple, and it had been done by a human. One Sarek cadet snarled, his claws scraping the desk. He shouted that it was only luck, that no one could repeat such a thing. But another cadet from the Varan's side rose and spoke with steady voice. He said it was not luck. He said he had watched closely. He said the human's mind worked in ways they could not follow. And if that was luck, then luck was stronger than all their training. His words spread like fire, splitting the room into factions of doubt and belief. The instructor slammed his clawed fist against the desk, the sound like thunder. He told them to be silent. He told them to remember discipline. But even his command did not erase the storm in their minds, because the turning point had already come. The balance had shifted. The old order where humans were ignored and dismissed had broken like glass, and though none said it aloud, all of them felt it. The galaxy they knew had taken a new shape. The human stood before them still calm, still steady, and he said only this. He said war is not a puzzle, it is a choice, and those who choose faster will win. His words carried no weight of pride, no demand for respect, but they carried the weight of truth, and the truth stung deeper than any boast. The instructor dismissed the class with harsh voice. He told them to return to quarters. Yet none rose quickly. They lingered. They whispered. Their eyes pulled again and again to the human, who walked quietly back to his seat and gathered his things, as if the storm was nothing, as if he had only done what anyone could do. And this calmness disturbed them more than victory itself. For arrogance they could hate, but calm certainty they could not fight. When the human left the hall, the cadets followed his shadow with their eyes, and some felt anger boil, some felt respect bloom, and some felt fear grow heavy. But all of them knew they would never forget what had happened, never forget the day a human had broken the unbreakable, never forget the moment the storm had changed. The instructor remained alone after they were gone. He stood before the glowing map, his claws brushing the stars, his eyes narrow. He replayed the plan again and again, searching for weakness, searching for cracks. But each time he returned to the same truth. The human's design did not break, and unease grew deeper in him, for he knew the future was shifting in ways he could not control. Outside the academy halls, the human walked under the cold lamps. Cadets whispered as he passed, some keeping their distance, others watching with curiosity. He did not return their eyes. He kept walking, his steps steady, his gaze forward, and the path before him seemed longer than the academy corridors. It seemed to stretch beyond the stars themselves, as if destiny was waiting in silence for his arrival. In their quarters, cadets argued late into the night. Some swore the human was a danger. Some swore he was hope. But all agreed on one thing: nothing would be the same again. And the turning point had come not with thunder, not with fire, but with a quiet hand drawing lines across a map, lines that changed everything. The academy night was long and restless. The great halls grew quiet, yet the dormitories were filled with whispers that would not fade. Cadets sat in circles across their rooms, their voices sharp or hushed, their faces marked with pride wounded or pride shaken, for what they had witnessed in the chamber still echoed in their minds. The puzzle that no one could break had been solved, and it had been solved by a human who they once thought was nothing. Some cadets of the Serric species spoke with rage, their claws scraping metal walls as they cursed the day humans were allowed inside the academy. They said this was insult. They said this was betrayal. They said the academy was sacred ground for noble minds, not for primitives who came from a small blue world with little history of the stars. Their voices burned with anger, but behind the anger was fear. Fear that their place above others was now uncertain. Other cadets of the Varen sat silent, their long throats humming with unease. They had watched carefully, and they knew what they saw was not luck. They whispered that the human had moved with certainty. They whispered that his eyes had not doubted once. They whispered that perhaps this was the birth of something greater. And though they did not say it aloud, they felt a weight of respect forming slowly in their hearts. In another dormitory, cadets of the Chirene argued until dawn. One slammed his wings against the wall, declaring that the human was danger. He said that if one human could break the puzzle, then what would many humans do? But another cadet shook her head. She said perhaps that was the very reason the galaxy needed them, for their way of seeing was different. Their way of moving was free, and perhaps without them the academy was trapped in chains of its own making. Their argument rose high and fell low, but no resolution came, only the sense that nothing would ever return to what it was before. The human, meanwhile, sat alone in his small room, the stars shining beyond his window like silent watchers. He did not join the whispers. He did not listen to the arguments. He sat calm with hands folded. He replayed the map only once in his mind. Then he let it fade, because to him the puzzle was no longer important. It was only a reflection of a truth he already carried. The truth that war was not theory. War was choice, and the one who chose faster lived. He knew this truth was simple, and simplicity was the strength that others could not see. As dawn rose across the academy grounds, the cadets gathered again, their faces tired yet tense, their voices still sharp with argument. Some glared at the human as he entered the hall. Others avoided his eyes. But all of them felt a strange pull toward him, as if his presence was now heavier than before, as if the air around him carried weight of change, weight of threat, weight of promise. The instructor entered with heavy steps, his scaled face unreadable, his voice sharp as he ordered silence. He told them that today they would not study new puzzles. Today they would study the reaction to the one that had been broken. For war was not only about victory. It was about what followed victory, about how soldiers and leaders responded when the world they knew collapsed before them. His words made them restless, for they knew he spoke not to them alone, but also to himself. One Serric cadet raised his claw and shouted that the human should be removed from the academy. He said the human did not belong. He said his presence was poison. Others joined, their voices heavy with fear. But then a Varen cadet stood and spoke slowly. He said the academy was meant to find strength wherever it lived. He said if strength had revealed itself in a human, then it should be studied, not denied. His words cut through the hall like a blade, and for a moment silence held again. The human listened without rising, his eyes calm, his voice steady as he finally spoke. He said he did not come to shame anyone. He said he did not come to prove anything. He said he came to learn as they did. And if his way of seeing was different, then it was not curse but chance. His words were plain, but they carried weight, for they were spoken without anger, without defense. They were spoken with calm certainty, and the cadets felt that certainty like a mountain standing against storm. The instructor watched closely, his eyes narrow, his thoughts unreadable. He asked the cadets if they understood what fear was. He told them that fear could destroy armies, but it could also build them. He said that what they felt now was fear of change, and how they carried that fear would decide if they were leaders or cowards. His words struck deep, for each cadet knew he was right, and their eyes turned again to the human, who remained unmoved. Later that day in the mess hall, the cadets gathered again. Whispers spread faster than food. They stared at the human sitting alone at one corner, trays untouched, his gaze quiet. Some Sarek cadets approached with anger, their claws tapping the table. They demanded to know who had trained him. They demanded to know what secret his people kept. But he only looked at them and said there was no secret. He said survival was the only teacher humans ever had. His words unsettled them more than silence would have, for they carried no weakness to exploit. A Chirene cadet walked past and paused, her wings folding. She bowed slightly, not out of friendship, but out of recognition. She whispered that she hoped his way of seeing could one day save lives, not only break puzzles. And then she walked away. Her voice left behind an echo that softened some hearts and hardened others, for respect toward a human was unthinkable, yet it had just been spoken aloud. The rest of the day was thick with tension. Training drills were performed in silence. Cadets stole glances at the human as he moved, his body light, his steps steady. He did not stumble. He did not falter. And the more they watched, the more they felt a truth rising, that arrogance was absent, that fear was absent, that what remained was calm strength, and calm strength was more dangerous than rage. When night returned, the whispers grew again, yet this time they were different. Some cadets admitted they wanted to learn how he saw. Some admitted they wished to train with him. Others swore they would never bow to a human, but all of them agreed that he was no longer invisible. He was no longer just another figure in the hall. He was a shadow that stretched across their days, a presence that pressed against their thoughts even in dreams. The instructor in his private chamber sat before a dim console, his claws tapping slowly, his eyes heavy with thought. He replayed the human's words. He replayed the human's calmness, and he whispered to himself that the academy had changed. He whispered that whether they wanted it or not, the cadets would never see the same again, and in that whisper was a weight of fear and also a weight of respect. The academy slept uneasy. The stars above burned silent, and within that silence the shape of tomorrow shifted, for the cadets knew they were standing at the edge of something greater, and the reactions they carried now would shape not only their future, but perhaps the fate of the galaxy. And at the center of it all sat a human who drew no pride from what he had done, a human who simply saw where others could not, and that truth alone was enough to change everything. The days after the puzzle carried a strange weight across the academy. Drills were still held, lectures were still spoken, but beneath every command and beneath every echo of boots against stone, there was a quiet change. Cadets no longer looked at the human as they once had. Before he had been invisible, a figure passing without notice. Now every glance carried a question. Every whisper carried his name. Every silence carried his shadow. The instructor tried to restore order. He sharpened his lessons. He increased the difficulty of drills. He barked louder. His claws struck the desk harder. Yet even he knew that order had shifted. For each time he spoke, he felt the eyes of cadets drifting to the human, waiting to see his reaction, waiting to see if his calm would remain. And it always remained, steady as stone, light as breath, and this calmness unsettled the old order more than any shout could. One morning the instructor announced a debate. He said the academy must not only fight with weapons, but also with ideas. He ordered the cadets to gather in the hall. He told them to speak of strategy, to defend their theories, to prove the value of what they had learned, and he promised no mercy for those who faltered. The hall filled quickly, voices already sharp with nerves, and the human sat quietly at the back, his eyes lowered, as if he was only another student once more. The Sarek cadets rose first, their claws shining as they spoke of strength. They said victory belonged to those with numbers, with force, with overwhelming power. They drew maps of wide fronts and crushing blows. They declared that no enemy could withstand the weight of united might. Their voices roared and many cadets nodded, for their words carried the pride of tradition, the pride of history written in blood and conquest. Next, the Varan cadets spoke, their long throats humming as they described patience. They said victory was not in force, but in waiting, in striking only when the enemy was weak. They drew maps of ambushes hidden in shadow. They spoke of supply lines cut silently, of commanders outmaneuvered before they knew the battle had begun. Their words carried the chill of patience, the weight of silence, and many cadets nodded again, for their words too had been proven across centuries. The Chirene cadets then rose, their wings spread, their voices sharp. They said victory was in speed, in motion, in never giving the enemy a chance to breathe. They drew maps of sudden strikes, fleets darting like arrows across the stars. They said hesitation was death, that movement itself was the weapon, and their voices filled the hall with the sound of wind and storm. The instructor nodded to each group, his face unreadable, his claws tapping against the desk, and then he turned his eyes toward the human. He asked if he had anything to say. The hall grew quiet. Cadets shifted in their seats, some smirking, some scowling, some leaning forward with hunger, waiting to hear if the human's calm voice could stand again before their pride, waiting to hear if his words could wound them deeper than his plan had. The human rose slowly, his steps light as he walked to the front, his face calm, his voice plain. He said strength was real. He said patience was real. He said speed was real, but none alone was enough. He said war was not a single note. It was a song, and a song needed many notes. He said the enemy was never bound to one style. So why should the commander be bound? His words fell soft yet heavy, and the cadets frowned, for they had never thought of war as more than their chosen path. He told them that on earth battles were rarely pure. No army had the luxury of perfect strength. No army had the time for endless patience. No army had the space for endless speed. Instead, survival demanded that all three lived inside a single mind: strength when the blow must land, patience when the trap must wait, speed when the chance appeared. He said the lesson was not about tactics, it was about freedom, the freedom to choose without chains. The hall murmured. Some cadets shook their heads, others leaned closer. The instructor narrowed his eyes. He asked the human if freedom was not chaos. He said discipline was the heart of command. But the human shook his head gently. He said discipline kept armies alive, but imagination made them win, and imagination was nothing more than the courage to see choices that others refused to see. His words struck deeper than any diagram, deeper than any map, because they touched the fear each cadet carried, the fear of choosing wrong. The Sarek cadets snarled, their claws scraping stone. They shouted that humans were reckless, that freedom was weakness. But the human only looked at them and asked if chains were strength. His words hung in silence, cutting sharper than claws, and though they glared they could not answer, for the question was heavier than their rage. The Varan cadets muttered that patience had always saved their kind, that waiting was wisdom. The human nodded and agreed that patience was wisdom, but he asked them what if waiting meant losing the chance that never came again, and their throats fell silent, their hum fading, for they too had no answer. The Chirene cadets flared their wings. They shouted that speed was life. The human smiled faintly and said speed was indeed life. But he asked what if speed ran into a trap? What if speed became blind? And their wings folded slowly, for they also knew the truth in his words. The hall grew silent, every cadet caught between pride and doubt, every cadet feeling chains loosen in their minds even if they did not wish it. And the instructor watched with eyes that glowed faint under the light. He felt unease, yet also a strange respect, for he knew the human's lesson was not just for the cadets, it was for him as well. The human ended with words simple and quiet. He said war was not about proving who was right. It was about surviving when death reached for all, and survival demanded not only strength or patience or speed, but all of them at once, and beyond them it demanded something greater. It demanded imagination. It demanded freedom. It demanded courage to see choices where others saw walls. He said this was a lesson beyond tactics, and when he finished he bowed slightly and returned to his seat. The hall remained silent long after he sat down. The cadets looked at one another, none willing to speak first. The instructor finally cleared his throat and dismissed them, his voice rough, and the cadets rose slowly, their minds heavy with thoughts they could not escape. Their whispers carried less rage now, more uncertainty, more reflection, and though some still glared at the human, their glares no longer carried the same power, for they had heard truth, and truth lingers longer than hate. That night the academy was restless again. Cadets lay in their bunks, their eyes wide. They dreamed of battles not yet fought. They dreamed of choices that could not be undone. They dreamed of freedom and chains, and in their dreams the face of the human returned again and again, steady, calm, and unshaken, a reminder that war was not puzzle or pride, but choice. The instructor in his chamber stared at the stars through his window, his claws tapping the stone, his thoughts heavy. He whispered to himself that the human was dangerous, not because of arrogance, not because of ambition, but because of freedom, freedom that no other mind in the academy dared to carry. And he knew that if this freedom spread, it would reshape not only the academy, but the galaxy beyond. The academy halls were quiet under the silver glow of night. The stars above burned steady, yet the hearts within the stone walls carried unrest. Cadets slept uneasily, their dreams twisted with images of maps and choices, their pride shaken, their futures uncertain, and among them the human slept calm, his breath even, his mind unshaken, while across the grounds in a private chamber the instructor sat alone with shadows. The instructor leaned over the console, his scaled hands resting heavy, his eyes fixed on the glowing map that replayed the puzzle. Again and again he shifted fleets. Again and again he broke supply lines. Again and again he sought to shatter the human's plan. But each time the trap closed back upon the enemy. Each time the order held. Each time the map breathed with strength. And the more he tested, the more his claws trembled, because no matter how he moved, the human's vision remained strong. He whispered to himself that it was chance. Then he whispered that it was not. He whispered that it was luck. Then he whispered that it was something more. His voice cracked under the weight of his own doubt, and in the silence of the chamber he felt fear. A fear he had not felt in decades. A fear not of battle or death, but of change. Change too large to stop. Change too silent to see until it had already wrapped around him. He remembered wars he had fought. He remembered commanders who had stood against him. He remembered cunning minds and ruthless hearts. Yet none of them had ever unsettled him like this human cadet. None of them had ever made him feel that the future itself was slipping from his grasp. And as the map glowed before him, he realized that this was not only about one puzzle. It was about a way of seeing, a way of thinking, a way of being free from chains. The instructor rose, his claws tapping against the stone floor. He walked to the window. He stared out at the dark sky, the stars wide and endless, and he asked himself a question he could not answer. He asked what would happen if many humans learned to think like this one. He asked what would happen if entire armies carried such vision. He asked what would happen if humanity, once dismissed as primitive, rose with this freedom in their hearts. And the question tightened his chest with dread. Meanwhile the cadets whispered in the dormitories, their voices tangled with confusion. Some still swore the human was a danger. Some admitted they wanted to follow his path. Some lay awake with fear, some with awe. But all of them carried the same truth. The academy was no longer the same, and though no order had been spoken, they all knew that history had bent in silence within those walls, bent by the hand of a human. The next day the drills were heavy. The instructor shouted commands louder than before. He demanded perfection. He punished mistakes with cruel swiftness. But even as he barked, his eyes drifted again and again to the human. The cadet moved steady, his actions calm, his focus unbroken, and though the instructor wanted to crush him with weight, he knew that weight would not break him, for the human carried something more than discipline. He carried freedom, and freedom could not be chained by rules. As the days passed, whispers reached beyond the cadets. Instructors of other halls heard of the event. Officers visiting the academy heard of the puzzle broken. Rumors spread like wind across stone. Each version twisted. Some saying the human cheated. Some saying the instructor bent the rules. Some saying the human saw with eyes that no other species had. And though the truth blurred, the effect grew. The name of the human cadet passed between lips like a spark waiting for flame. The instructor sat again alone at night, his claws tight, his breath heavy, and he felt the truth pressing closer. He knew he could not erase what had been seen. He knew silence would not kill the whispers. He knew the cadets would carry this memory long after they left the academy. And he knew that the galaxy itself might one day feel the weight of this moment. A single cadet breaking a puzzle, yet in truth breaking far more than that, breaking the illusion of superiority held by so many. He whispered to himself that humans were not ready. He whispered that the galaxy was not ready. But the whispers carried no strength, because deep in his mind he knew readiness did not matter. Change was not waiting for permission. Change was already here, sitting quietly in the shape of a young human cadet with calm eyes and steady voice. And the fear inside him deepened, because he knew he was witnessing the beginning of something vast. The cadets felt it too, though they did not say it. When they marched in drills, their eyes flicked to the human. When they debated in chambers, their arguments bent toward his words. When they ate in silence, they listened for his voice. He had become a shadow across their lives, not by force, not by demand, but simply by being what he was, a mind unchained, and shadows cast by truth are not easily erased. One evening during a lecture, a Chirene cadet asked the human directly. She asked if humans sought conquest. She asked if his vision was meant to dominate the stars. The hall grew still. The instructor's eyes narrowed, waiting to hear the answer. And the human spoke in calm tone. He said no. He said his people sought survival. He said vision was not about conquest, but about choice. And those who feared choice often mistook it for domination. His words softened some hearts, sharpened others, but all listened, for they knew his voice carried no lie. The instructor gritted his teeth. He wished to silence the human, yet he could not, for the lesson was not wrong, and though he feared its power, he could not deny its truth. He dismissed the class with harsh words, yet his heart beat heavy as he walked back to his chamber, for he knew each word had sunk into the cadets deeper than any order could. That night he dreamed of wars yet to come. He dreamed of fleets commanded by human minds. He dreamed of traps unfolding across stars. He dreamed of enemies falling before battles had begun. He dreamed of empires shaken by choices too quick to counter. And he woke with sweat along his scaled brow, whispering to himself that the galaxy was not ready, whispering that he was not ready, whispering that no one was ready. The days turned to weeks. The whispers did not fade. The cadets no longer spoke of the human as background. They spoke of him as measure, as question, as challenge. Some feared him, some admired him, but all remembered him. And the instructor watched with silent dread, for he knew he could not stop the tide. He knew the storm was already rising beyond his walls. And so he sat again before the glowing map in his chamber, alone with silence, the stars burning outside his window, and he whispered the truth he could no longer deny. He whispered that if one human cadet could do this, then humanity was far more dangerous than any empire believed, and though he feared it, part of him respected it. Part of him knew that the galaxy would soon bend to this truth, whether it wished to or not. The human, meanwhile, walked the halls as if nothing had changed, his eyes calm, his steps steady, his shadow long under the silver lights, and the cadets who once mocked him now parted silently, watching with unease, and in their hearts they carried a memory they could not bury, the memory of the day a human redrew the art of war, and though the instructor never spoke it aloud, his fear whispered louder than words, this was only the beginning.